All right, going to talk some baseball with CJ Nitkowski. And CJ, I think one of the things that I've most enjoyed about having you around is just the realization that your brain thinks in a way that you're always thinking of stuff that maybe it isn't common to think about, interesting angles, interesting thoughts, questions. I'm curious with this Rangers team, what are some of the things that I guess stand out to you that maybe isn't the general, oh, are they going to win 32 games? But like some of the things that have kind of been spinning around in your head.
Well, a couple of things. I do think as far as what the lineup is going to look like from opening day till the end of the season, I think is a really interesting one, right? The idea that Isaiah Kiner-Falefa has kind of emerged here a little bit, the Willie Calhoun injury, what that has done to what the starting lineup is going to look like. I mean, we thought all winter, man, where is Nick Solak going to get his at-bats? I think we all really liked what we saw from him last year. What does that look like? Is he moving around the diamond? Would they give him the third base job? I think he looked okay at third last year. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is, I think, the best defender that the Rangers have in the infield right now. And the fact that he's hit has really kind of made this whole thing fascinating, right? We all went into regular spring training, think, hey, Greg Bird and Ronald Guzman are going to battle for that because one of them is going to win it. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. So it's Todd Frazier over there, Kiner-Falefa at third, and probably Solak in left. And then what does it look like when Willie comes back? And what kind of moves are you going to want to make? And the idea that what we've seen so many different years previously, every other normal year, that you would give a guy a couple of weeks, maybe even 3 or 4 weeks before you made any really big decisions. You can't do that now. Like the Rangers have a legitimate shot to be a postseason team with the rotation that they have. They're not going to give somebody 3 weeks to figure it out. That's nearly half the season, right? So any of these guys get off to a slow start, and then the adjustments that are made, I think that's the part that I become most fascinated with is, and I understand that there's no such thing as a regular lineup anymore anyway, right? There's so much turnover and there's so much platoon play that happens in a game. But I think the way that Woody balances that, and even for Willie, as good as Willie was last year, and I think we all believe he's a really good big league hitter, he went on a stretch last year for a couple of months where he was the best left-handed hitter against left-handed pitching in baseball. I mean, he absolutely crushed it. Left on left, he was unbelievable. And then he struggled down the stretch in just as much of a dramatic way. And I do. I think he's an everyday big leaguer. I think he's a 600 at-bat kind of player. But I just wonder if he gets off to a slower start. I know the summer camp went okay for him, not maybe what he wanted and what we saw. Would there be a potential platoon situation that even happens in left with a guy like him and Nick Solak maybe against some of those tougher left-handed pitchers? So for me, lineup construction and what it looks like for the bulk of this season and how Woody's going to balance that, to me, I think will be one of the more interesting things to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I'm interested, so if they were to, the more lefties they face, the more they're able to get Nick Solak in there and like a natural fit if everyone's healthy. But starting Saturday, and when Willie Calhoun is, supposedly going to be ready to be back in the starting lineup, if they have a stretch of 4 straight righties that they face, how are they going to balance everyone? Who's going to sit? And I guess the possibility that maybe Isaiah Kiner-Falefa doesn't hit as well in the regular season that he has, dating back to March is certainly very realistic. That's a possibility. But I am curious how they balance it because I feel like, and you kind of alluded to this in the regular season, you're not or in a typical season, I should say, early season platoons while these situations work themselves out are fine because you got 162 games, but it just seems like the need to put the best lineup out there as much as possible is going to be way more important than it would be in April or May of a typical season.
Yeah, and I think it'll have to do with not only what pitcher are the Rangers seeing, but what pitcher is on the mound for the Rangers, right? Using Kyle Gibson as an example, who is a big ground ball guy, uses that 2-seam fastball. Do you then say, no matter what, we want our best defense out here? So regardless of how Kiner-Falefa is hitting, would you want him playing third every time Kyle Gibson is pitching? As an example, just kind of using that maybe as something. And then if you have where maybe you get a little bit more of a fly ball strikeout pitcher, maybe Lance Lynn is in there, and you have a righty, the righty that's going to get Willie Calhoun in the lineup. Would we see Nick Solak then creep into the infield potentially? We saw him working at first early on. And it seemed like, and I haven't been here, obviously, the way that you have been, but I feel like we hadn't heard as much about that. At one point, there was talk about him and the work that he was doing over first base. I don't know if that's definitely where he is an option going forward. There could be days where there's not the right matchup for Chu, because that's the one thing about this game that amazes me now. We no longer just say left-right. It's what kind of lefty with what kind of stuff based on this guy's swing plane, not just the history of what he's done, right? The idea that you can kind of predict what you think is the best matchup based on swing mechanics and pitch repertoire and how often those pitches are used, which to me, again, is one of those kind of nerdy, fascinating things that as the game has gotten dug in deeper and deeper, what we will do. So I think there's those times for Woody, because I feel like Solak's a guy that over the course of a regular season, I'd love to see him get 600 plate appearances and maybe even more and see what he can do. His time and his defensive positioning probably will be the one that is the most inconsistent. I think that's the way he'll play. Might be in left, might be DHing, could be a third. Would they put him even in center? We saw him in center field in spring training if there's not the right matchup for Danny Santana. I think he's the guy that probably starts games at the most different positions with the most variety. But that's what, that's kind of the wait and see, man. And it's tough. It's so much more difficult now. There was a time where a manager could throw out 140 of the same lineups every year and nobody would ever second guess what he did based on players' histories and their track record and everything else. But those days are over. You work a lot harder now to construct a lineup.
I think this predates your time with the Rangers. Even if it doesn't, I don't know if it would have gotten back to you. But I've had an infamous blow up with a caller who told me because in high school they had the same lineup every day, the Rangers need to have the same lineup every day. That did not go so well. I'll tell you, if you want me to blow up at you, then start talking about your high school baseball experiences in comparison to
you know what's funny about it, though? I mean, I would say that I think when I first started doing this, and even when I was playing the game, I always felt like for position players, they would love to be able to come in every day and know exactly where they're going to be in the lineup. And I thought there was value in that. And I think there still is. I think guys would like to be in that position. There's no doubt that you'd love to be an established guy. And I'm not even talking about a superstar. Like Mike Trout knows he's coming in and he's batting second pretty much most days and playing center field, but not even to that level. Even for other regular contributors, there is something to be said for I know about where I'm going to hit in the lineup. I know that I'm playing 90% of the time at this position. I'm in a position where the manager will let me know the day before when I might have a day off. That's how solid I am in my spot. I think guys would love that. But the reality is now, especially as we get the turnover to this next generation, they're coming through the system as utility players, playing multiple positions, not getting too locked in. And I think that they're just much more accustomed to it. So while it'll still be there, I think their first choice, they're much more open to the idea that things might be different. I actually got to go check the lineup because I'm not exactly sure if I'm playing and if I am, where I am in the lineup and where I might be playing defensively. So they're much more open to it. Certainly these guys are now.
One thing I was thinking about when I was looking at Colorado's lineup, and they've got a really good 1 through 4 with Dahl, Story, Arenado, or Blackman, Arenado, and then Daniel Murphy's not someone without skins on the wall either. But someone asked me, okay, if Danny Santana, who he's one of these guys, he's had one. I mean, I guess his rookie year was good, but it's not like he's got a long track record. If he's not your 3-hitter. Who is? And I was thinking it's not like the Rangers. I think there are questions with the Rangers lineup because no one really has a track record. I guess Chu's 72 years old. But he's been Mr. Reliable. But other than that, what's that?
It is a young 72.
It's very, very young 72. Like, Joey, to some people, has been really productive for a few years now, but I know there are people that look at the batting average and say, well, he wasn't productive 2 years ago. Either way, it's not like the Rangers are littered with guys with a track record that you can kind of count on. And that makes me think the range of how much of a struggle it could be, but also how good this lineup could be is pretty wide, because they do have some guys like Danny Santana repeats last year, and if Rugi does this, and if Isaiah Kiner-Falefa does that. But I guess when you really think of this lineup, what is this going to be, an average lineup? Do you think it's going to be better than that? Like, what beyond just the lineup combination, what stands out to you about just the identity?
Yeah, I mean, we like to think that we've seen the last 2 years, right, where they've been taking a bigger step and then scoring a bunch of runs. And could those numbers continue to jump? I'm with you. I'm not worried about the batting average. I know strikeouts are frustrating, but it's part of the game, right? Everybody's doing it. We know those numbers continue to climb. The 3-hole to me is probably the most fascinating part of this lineup, as you mentioned. Like Danny Santana, as good as he was last year, I don't know how many times he batted third or that he was in that spot in the lineup. Is he more comfortable maybe with lower expectations? And I'm just kind of, taking a guess at it, the idea of where he is mentally and who ultimately locks down that spot, because I think it has a lot to do with the success of this lineup. And what kind of risk are you willing to take too? Right. I wondered about Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. As strong as this summer camp and regular spring training went for him, would Woody consider pushing him up the lineup a little bit? And I don't think he's going to make any dramatic changes early on. I think we're pretty locked in with Chu and Elvis Andrews. I know Elvis didn't have a great summer camp either, but I don't think it matters for a guy like him. Right? I just don't. And so those two guys are your 1 and 2. But I wondered about, and not getting, jumping the gun without track record. But if for some reason Danny Santana was maybe more comfortable hitting below Joey Gallo, and I know that, and Woody had said Joey's going to stay in the 4 spot. That's the spot they like him. What do you do with the 3 spot? And it's tempting for me to want to put Nick Solak in.
Yeah,
it really is. Now I know the idea of we don't have to go as much left right. I think there's still value in there. We saw it in Tuesday night's game. I was actually surprised that he went Santana, Gallo, Odor. I thought Todd Frazier would have split those guys. I thought he would have split Odor and Joey. Now it all depends, I guess, on the opposing bullpen too, with the new 3-batter minimum rule. But I thought for sure we'd see a split. We'll see how the year goes. I think there's going to be a lot of variations. But I think it's going to be a productive lineup, and there's certain things, like I said, that I believe might be tempting for Woody at times to put a young guy. We listen to him all the time, right? He is the biggest fan of each of his players, right? I mean, when he talks about guys, he gets behind them all the way, which makes me think, you know what, he might take a chance once in a while and put a young player like Nick Solak batting third. If Isaiah continues to what he's doing, would we ever see him in the 2-hole? Potentially, depending on the right matchup. I think it's possible if those guys continue to progress, but it will still be some big power with lower batting averages, I think, that you're expecting from guys like Joey and Rugi. The question becomes who's getting on base, and also how the ballpark plays, right? I mean, the ballpark, I think, we talked about it yesterday, really should play to the advantage of Elvis. I think it really should play to the advantage of Chu. Yes, he had 24 home runs last year, and that was a career high. I don't think we expect that. I don't think we expect that number to go down. And my biggest concern, and it shouldn't probably be that big of a deal, is that guys start getting frustrated with the ballpark and changing their swings. Right? I think you have to be the same guy no matter what. You might get a little frustrated that ball that you hit in the gap. I played in the first season at Comerica Park, and I watched before they ever moved the fences in, and I watched those hitters get really ticked off. I mean, drive a ball in that deep right center field gap that was a home run at Tiger Stadium the year before, and now that's not even close to the warning track, and it's a pop out, and bats getting thrown in the dugout, and helmets getting slammed. And that frustration level, I just hope that doesn't carry over into the lineup a couple of times, that we'll see that happen inevitably this year. And then that somehow affects the player's mentality and then what he does physically when he steps in the box.
CJ, I don't know. I think you were on the Zoom call when Woody was talking about why Elvis and Santana 2-3. And the first thing he mentioned was speed. And speed is it's still valuable. We don't, stolen bases are down, although this team led the AL in stolen bases last year. But usually, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. You typically, when asking a guy these days, why is this player batting second? Why is this player batting third? Speed's not the first thing that they answer. That's more maybe, down in the lineup. But it makes me think that their approach is going to be one, they don't have as many 3-run home run guys in their lineup that they've had in the past. And I get the sense that they're going to be super aggressive on the bases, because Woody a number of times this offseason or this build-up period has mentioned putting pressure on the pitchers with speed this and, working on stealing and wanting these guys to be aggressive, in stealing bases in these summer camp games. And I don't know. It was just interesting to me. It seems like that's going to be a big part of their identity, maybe out of necessity with the personnel or ability with the personnel, but that's probably not something, if you go to the Astros or the Yankees or, the Rockies or, teams with a good lineup, they certainly prefer to have speed than not. But I don't know if it's like one of the first 2 or 3 things that they talk about, but that does seem like it might be a part of the identity for this lineup.
You're absolutely right. And I think it's about your personnel and what you have, right? The idea of, we'd love to have a bunch of guys that never strike out, put the ball in play, don't chase, and also connect for power, right? The idea of having a really solid, incredible lineup like we see around the league up and down 1 through 9. But if you don't have that, then the question becomes, all right, how do we score runs? Now, manufacturing runs is also something I think that's changed a little bit, right? We're not going to bunt guys over. The Rangers will hit and run a little bit, and we also know that a guy like Elvis is perfectly comfortable doing it, maybe even calling it himself when he's got a guy like Chu over at first base and the right side is open. But manufacturing to some degree, yes, there's still some slug in the middle, but you're right. And so having that speed and putting some pressure on the defense is something I think we'll see from the Rangers again this year. And you have to be careful, right? There's two sides to that coin as far as your success rate and running into outs and understanding situations and saying, all right, you know what, this pitcher's got his back against the wall right now. This is the wrong time to get thrown out at second base. And that doesn't even necessarily mean stolen bases. Like, that's certainly part of it, but it's also the ability to go first to third. It's good secondary leads. It's good in getting good reads no matter what base that you may be on once a ball's put in play. It's understanding where all your position players are when you're on base, right? How many times have you seen a guy stand out at second base and look around to check where the outfielders are? It's really important, and it requires just a little bit of buy-in to do those things properly so that when a ball is hit, you know exactly where that fielder is and whether or not that ball is getting down. And you're going to score on the easy ones, right? But it's those borderline ones. And if this team ends up relying on pitching the way that they are, and we expect maybe a lot of these games to be close, those are the things that are going to matter most. Yeah, the 3-run home run's fantastic, and we love watching Joey Gallo hit some of those monster bombs, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch that in a new ballpark. But how do you get the most out of your lineup? And in the case of the Rangers here in 2020, that is going to be being aggressive on the bases, doing it well, and putting more guys in scoring position. You know, as much as, you know, people don't love Rougned Odor's batting average, he was great in those spots last year. And some people will say, well, runners in scoring position, is it really just a matter of luck? I don't believe that it is. I believe there's some part of the mentality. We talk about little things within at bats like expanding the strike zone a little bit when the guy's on second base, right? Picking the right times to do that on the right pitches. It's okay, in my opinion, to do that. You don't want a guy chasing pitches over his head at any time, but especially with nobody on base. But there may be a time where if you're the guy who's counted on to drive in runs, that you can go 2 or 3 inches off the plate and get that runner in from second base with maybe an opposite field base hit, those kinds of things. Rugi was very good at that last year. In order to do that, you got to make sure those guys are in scoring position. And so if Chu is walking or Santana's got a single or Elvis finds his way to first base, the idea of being aggressive and getting into scoring position with that next part of the lineup coming up, the Rangers probably do that by using their legs.
All right, last thing, CJ, and want to, I guess, talk pitching here quickly. And there's plenty of pitching to discuss, but when you look at the rotation, the guy who's most intriguing to me is Jordan Lyles, just because I guess if you really look at the second half of last year and really take away one bad month, that there's some upside that suggests he could be more productive than your number 5 starter. They're also, you know, last year could have also just been a hot stretch for him, and maybe he reverts back. You know, I think there's a lot of question there. I'm curious in your prep and looking at Jordan Lyles, what jumps out to you about who he is and what he might be able to be for this team?
Yeah, I'm going to see him a ton. Unfortunately, we'll get to see him tonight, so we'll be able to dig in a little bit more and really see it firsthand in our ballpark right here on Wednesday, which will be nice to be able to see with him. But I love the ad because you're taking a guy who went on a nice run and you're asking him to stay at the very bottom of the rotation, right? Which I love that, because there's a lot of times when something like that happens and then you may expect more out of a guy. And you say, you know what, let's slide him into our 4 spot or even our 3 spot behind a couple of really good starters and make those expectations climb a little bit. And then there's some disappointment if you can't repeat. So I think the pressure is actually off of him, and I like that for him in that spot. I know he was working through a couple of things that he talked about in his last outing, which is very common here as we go through, you know, spring training / summer camp. And you may throw 3 changeups in a row and something you never would do in the regular season, whatever it may be. Those kinds of things I think have gone on with him a little bit here in the summer camp. But I love the ad. I mean, it's a value ad, first of all, which if you think about this rotation 1 through 5, they're really all value ads. You don't feel like you're overpaying anybody, or the Rangers haven't put themselves in a spot where it's like, man, if this doesn't work out with this one pitcher, we're in a jam. We're going to be tied up and we're going to be locked in. We're going to have no flexibility. Look around the league and some of these, you know, 100, 200, and even $300 million players that there might be some regret early on. The Rangers haven't done that and have that really solid rotation. So I love how he fits in. I think especially the way that, you know, if things go the way we think they're going to go, the bullpen is not going to be overused, right? This was a bullpen last year that set a franchise record in innings pitched. I know went over 600 innings pitched as a bullpen. I think it was 630 last year. That number's going down. Obviously, it's going down because we're playing a shortened season, but the rate of the innings that they're pitching is going down. So Jordan Lyles is a guy for me that you don't have to push. Your bullpen should be in a really good spot. We were talking about Jonathan Hernandez in Tuesday night's game. Like, I love Jonathan Hernandez last year. He's getting it done again this year, and he could be a multi-inning guy. When you look at the rotation, say, well, where does he fit in as a multi-inning guy, and how often are you really going to need that? Well, now bring in Jordan Lyles in that 5th spot, and to me, those are guys that could end up pairing really well together. When you think about him, maybe only asking him to be a 5-inning starter, you might ask him to only be a 2-time around the order kind of guy. And then you have this power arm if you have that game in hand, where then Jonathan Hernandez could potentially hand the ball off to Jose Leclerc or Jesse Chavez to set up, whoever it may be. So I really like the way that potentially could work out. I know they even haven't made a decision on whether or not he's going to make his first start, right? With all the off days early on, 3 off days here for the Rangers early, we may not see him make a start for a while. So he could even be in the bullpen, Jordan Lyles here potentially. But I love the ad. I think it's a really good one. And I don't even say taking a chance, because the risk is so low, but on a guy that had a nice run, even though it wasn't a 6-month run, it was a good enough run. The Rangers saw it there. And I think it's going to be a great complimentary piece.
60-0 or 59-1? What's more likely?
I feel a little bad. Since the Astros aren't going to make the postseason this year, maybe we'll let them have one of those wins. They can have one. I think they'll feel.
CJ, really appreciate it. Looking forward to another year of Rangers baseball with you.
You got it, buddy. Thanks for having me, and thanks for getting dressed up and combing your hair for me.